joining our monthly Indigenous film series. Like I said, my name is Megan. I'm with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and I will be your virtual host this evening. The Denver Museum of Nature and Science is pleased to partner with the International Institute for Indigenous Resource Management to present Indigenous film. As you watch the presentation tonight, please feel free to pop questions and comments in the chat. We'll be watching the chat throughout the event, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jean Rubin, Director of the Indigenous Film and Arts Festival.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could join us. I want to thank the Denver Museum of Nature and Science for hosting these monthly Indigenous film programs. The museum has been hosting events for the Indigenous Film and Arts Festival since 2009, 13 years, and have been hosting the monthly film series for the past 8 years. So we really appreciate that participation. And the other partner in presenting the monthly film series is the Denver American Indian Commission. So our thanks to commissioners as well. I also want to acknowledge our media sponsor for the year, Kuvo Jazz Radio. So with that, let me get to tonight's program. Our film tonight is Mémère Métisse, My Métis Grandmother. This film is a very personal documentary from director Janelle Wookey, who lovingly, some might say annoyingly, tries to coax her grandmother, Cecile St. Amant, to embrace her Métis heritage. As you'll see in the film, the grandmother has resisted acknowledging that heritage, and Janelle is curious to know why and to see if she can't change that. So it's a charming film, but it presents a very insightful exploration of contemporary pressures that can undermine cultural identity. So the film was produced in 2008. We first screened it in 2009, and really delighted to bring it back because the issues in this film continue to be relevant. Following the film, we'll be back with Mervyn Tano, who's with me. Merv is the president of the International Institute for Indigenous Resource Management. And our guest artist activist, Gregg Deal, you folks in Denver likely know him. He lives in Colorado Springs. So following the film, we'll bring back Merv and Gregg for a conversation. As Megan said, at any point during the film or during the conversation, you can put a question into the chat room. So we'll run the film and be back in 30 minutes. Let's roll it. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed our movie. Megan, since you were keeping track of where people are logging in from, we have now Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Honolulu, Hawaii. So.
Very cool. We'll have to add those to the list. Thanks, guys.
Add them to your list. So let me introduce Gregg Deal. He is a member of the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. He is a multidisciplinary artist, activist, and, as he says, disruptor. His work is informed by his native identity and includes exhaustive critiques of American society, politics, popular culture, and history. He works in a wide range of media, paintings, murals, performance work, filmmaking. We've screened some of his films. He does spoken word. He described his work in a 2018 TED Talk as honoring Indigenous experiences, challenging stereotypes, and pushing for accurate representations of Indigenous people in art. He has exhibited in a number of notable institutions, locally and nationally, and internationally. His work has been in the Denver Art Museum, at Redline Gallery here in Denver, at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. He was a featured artist. Our solo exhibit artist in 2017 at our Indigenous Film and Arts Festival. And in 2020, he was one of 2 artists that were featured. I think Megan has some links to put up. She's got his website in the chat room if you want to check out his artwork, and he also has a shop. You can get some of his artwork on t-shirts and stickers and all kinds of cool stuff. And I think she also has the link if you want to see his virtual art exhibit with our film festival in 2020. That exhibit is still up, so we'll get that link up there as well. Gregg lives along the Front Range of Colorado with his wife and 5 children. We've known him, I think, almost since he moved to Colorado. Enjoy working with him. He's a great colleague and a good friend, and we're really happy to have him with us tonight. So, Gregg, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Yep. Thank you for having me, as always.
I'm going to turn the mic over to Merv and let him kick off our discussion.
Okay. I like this film. I like this film because, for me, it portrays the complexity of Indigenous identity and the kind of pervasiveness of historical kind of projections of power by the nation state or the colonial the settler state, France, England, and then Canada, because there's an irony that is present there in reclaiming her identity as Métis. She is, in a sense, validating the kind of erasure of part of who her people were. By becoming Métis, it is a construct, not necessarily an indigenous construct. It's a construct developed by the nation state. It is a construct imposed upon indigenous peoples. And so from that perspective, I want to ask Gregg about that kind of tension between this, what I call the ethnicizing of indigenous peoples. To say, as opposed to being Pyramid Paiute, you're American Indian or you're Native American. I wonder if you can reflect upon that and tell us a bit about the kind of I won't say struggles, but the fight to maintain that kind of specific tribal identity.
Geez, Merv, you're always hitting with the softball questions. Yeah, I mean,
invitations.
It's complicated, as complicated as it was sort of, articulated in the film. So too is it complicated here in, the lower 48. And a lot of that has to deal with federal policy. A lot of that has to deal with individual tribal sovereignty and the decisions that they make about who's part of your community and who's not. But then there's also the sort of Western or American, which is kind of one and the same, perception of Native people. Those perceptions are rooted by what they're informed by, which is mostly through media and through popular media, from little comic books and dime novels, in the late 1800s into the turn of the century, to films, to books, to paintings, to photography. That all of these things have informed what non-native people think native people are. And so it becomes so muddled and so complicated that it's almost an individual statement. And so my individual statement is that I didn't grow up connected. I was able to connect in high school and figure out in the most general sense possible what these things meant. But the irony of all of that is I have always been good, bad, or indifferent treated as a Native person. I grew up in Park City, Utah. It's very white and very diverse, and what little bit of diversity there is there is very segregated from everybody else. And so to be in and among a lot of other non-native, mostly white people, with my sister, we stood out when we were kids. And so that ended up being a really big part of sort of recognizing that I was different and trying to figure out where that connection was. Because not unlike the, Métis grandmother, my mom was very ashamed of where she was from as a full-blood Native woman from Pyramid Lake, as a Numa, a Pyramid or a Paiute woman who was born on our reservation. And I had to really fight that and work that and reconnect that. And I actually forced my mom to work this crap out because we were not able to connect if she was not willing to participate. And so I did all of the legwork to get everything back to where it needed to be, to get us properly aligned so that we could be enrolled. I took care of all of that. I took the paperwork to my mother, filled everything out and said, just sign it, because we had to get her enrolled before me or my sister could do it. And then of course my kids and my sister's kids. And it was this whole process. And it's interesting because it's like you grow up as a Native person because you're treated as a Native person, but then there's this whole other thing of connecting and figuring out what that identity is from a cultural standpoint, even though I am of the belief that the social and political understanding of being a Native person is just as much cultural as a lot of the things that are happening back home that are more traditional. And that's because we've been made to sort of understand our place in the United States, and understanding your place politically and socially isn't just a survival tool, but is something that's integrated into our identity as well. That's a lot, sorry.
No, I appreciate that, because that also demonstrates the complexity of cultural identity, but also political identity as well, because that's the kind of thing that status of an enrolled tribal member is a political status. It is not only if you will, kind of a cultural or ethnic identity. Bill Thomas, who's with us, is from Hawaii, and Bill and I have had discussions about this this notion of what it means to be Hawaiian or a local guy who might be part Hawaiian, part Chinese, part Puerto Rican, part Filipino, part Spanish, and all of that. And so very much like the Métis, you say, well, I'm a local boy, which doesn't reflect a particular kind of one particular ethnicity, but it's kind of a lifestyle, a kind of a worldview of people in Hawaii. much of which is influenced by Native Hawaiians, but also influenced by a whole range of other immigrants to the islands.
Yeah.
It is complex, and if you could kind of discuss also what that means, just in terms of that official designation in relation to you and your family vis-a-vis the U.S. government.
Yeah. Well, and first and foremost, there's no one way to identify. I've had this discussion at length with curators in museums, because they want to know, if you're a Native artist, they want to know how you want that identified on your card, on your place card that's associated with your work. And I've had this discussion where Natives will list their entire sort of, hereditary bloodlines, everything from the Native to the European to whatever. And I chose not to, because I was looking at things in the old way where, if I married a Shoshone woman and I went and lived on Shoshone land and we had children, then we would just be Shoshone, because that's where we live and that's the community that you belong to. Whether that's just, the way that those things are all connected, because like we're Paiute, but we are connected to Western Shoshone and we are nearby the Washoe. And then there's other Paiute groups, which I would call bands, but I don't know that anybody's officially said that. But there's different Paiute groups, and we're all sort of related in one way or another. But it's this idea that like I'm recognized by my tribe as a Paiute, and so I identify as a Pyramid Lake Paiute. And that's what's on my card. It just says Paiute, even though I'm Washoe and Western Shoshone and Fort Bidwell Paiute, which is a northern almost Oregon tribe in Nevada. But the way that all of this works is, well, in the United States, you can only belong to one tribe, and it doesn't matter what your bloodline is, and that tribe designates what their membership looks like. A lot of tribes use blood quantum to sort of decide whether or not you can qualify to belong to their tribal community. But it all comes down to family. It all comes down to like knowing who your parents are, knowing who your grandparents are. So this is not done through 23andMe and through hereditary or DNA testing, that it's done through genealogy, really, and understanding who your family is. So like my people, you are designated where you belong through the next male in your family. So my mom doesn't designate what tribe we belong to. My grandfather designates what tribe we belong to. And every tribe is different. They have different blood quantum policies. My tribe doesn't have any blood quantum policies. You have to know by name who your family is, and be able to prove those family lines. Because like, and this is the absurdity. So I'm half, and my mom is full blood, but on paper, I'm only considered to be 1/8 Native, because I'm only 1/8 Pyramid Lake Paiute, which of course is designated by my grandfather. And so because of the way that these things are sort of relegated through federal recognition of tribes, that's all you have. So on paper, I'm 1/8, even though I'm half. And it goes through this almost sort of ethnicity, designating like what you are based on fractions that were arbitrarily designated through censuses in the mid to late 1800s during the reservation era. And it creates a lot of problems. It means that it's a system designed to fail. It's a system that we are already seeing is having effect on members of the community. Their children cannot enroll in their community, even though they grew up there, even though they speak the language, even though they have connection to all the things they need to have connection to. But they can't because of these rules of blood quantum, which are a double-edged sword. They're important on one side, but they're also incredibly damaging on the other side, something we call paper genocide. And to your point, when there was a discussion with Native Hawaiians about this, and they're like, hey, do you want to do what these guys are doing? And the Native Hawaiians were like, no, we don't want anything to do with that. And because there's a pretty good record of failure with this process.
Yeah. Bill Thomas, I don't know if everybody can read that.
No, you gotta read it.
Okay, you want to read it?
Well, oops. Hang on, it just got longer. Okay.
Yeah.
So Bill he challenges me by putting in all this Hawaiian, and I give it my best shot. So he says nativeness in Hawaii wasn't necessarily defined by cocoa blood only, but by belonging to place, aina, that which feeds us. Help me out there.
And why ola loa?
Why ola? Oh, okay. Oops.
Oh,
Here we go. Kawaola, water is life. Recognizes our connections to our place by, quote, eating the land, aina, and the water that courses through our bodies. Means that we carry the land and the water with us no matter where we go. Therefore, we are from the place that feeds us, waters us, keeps us alive, takes care of us as we take care of them.
yeah. Gene and I were having a discussion related to this concept that, and it relates to Aotearoa, where Angela's from. And that is the notion of your Turanga Waiwai, that place that you stand, that place that is your home, from which you draw your strength, all of your familial kinds of connections, etc. And that would be a kind of a key element of that identity, the cultural identity. So,
Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Just raising my hand like a school child. So that's really, really interesting and such a beautiful way to put that too, because so my people do the same thing. We don't identify, like Paiute's a made up word. We call ourselves Numu, it just means the people. And but we identify according to diet. So in Paiute, I would say Kiuyui Tukara, which means that we are eaters of a specific fish that belongs in Pyramid Lake. And it only belongs in Pyramid Lake, called a Kiuyui. And so Walker Rivers nearby, they identify as trout eaters. And so each of the different bands or groups of Paiutes identify by diet because it regionally identifies us, but it also is a connection to our homelands, specific geographical areas of our homelands. We carry that with us because this is the food we eat, this is the water we drink, this is the land in which we reside, and we take that with us.
Yeah, and absolutely, and you can kind of delve into the science of that as well when you start looking at epigenetics, and your gut biome. All of this stuff is part of that heritage, where the land, in a sense, the connection with the land is embedded. Not only kind of a sensory, but actually physically as well.
So Bill has added a little more information. He says why means water in Hawaiian, and so when you say why, what you're saying is we're rich in water and rich in relatives.
So, the other thing I thought was fascinating about this film is kind of how quickly they went through a discussion Louis Riel. That the status of the Métis. So we don't, from this film, we don't really get a kind of a sense of the conflict, the actual conflict, the shooting, the killing that was part of this establishing that identity. There's a fascinating film where a Texas Ranger played by Gary Cooper, I think it is, goes up to Canada and is allies with the RCMP in the fight against the savages that the gentleman, you know, how he described himself, because that's who these guys were. They were the savages that were fighting for their lands, for their sovereignty, and Lord knows, colonists do not like that kind of that kind of competition.
Mm-hmm. You know, like you say, Greg, the messages are these Western messages are everywhere, and film was a real pervasive way of perpetuating creating the stereotypes and perpetuating the stereotypes.
Right.
So
yeah, because
I'm of the belief in America that that these images, these stereotypes, haven't just arbitrarily been manufactured, but that they are propaganda to the supposed benevolence of the United States. Natives need to be explained, and so they're explained in this way, and it's a palatable explanation, because if we get into the truth of what happened to Native people, it undermines the American dream. It undermines this idea of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of, I mean, 2016 was, you know, the Dakota Access Pipeline, freedom of assembly. And all of these things have ultimately been created because our truth, the truth of Native people in this land, undermines all of that. I mean, the only reason that Native people were able to exercise religious freedom in the United States was through an act of Congress in 1978. That's within my lifetime. And the fact that that happened and that people don't know about it is mind-boggling. But because there is no context, stories like this are unique, because people don't understand why there would be a disconnect, that
Right.
there is a disconnect. In fact, 40% of Americans believe that Native people are extinct. Why would they think that? And so all of these things have been very carefully curated and put into place specifically to undermine our existence and to bolster up the settler colonialism idea that this space was taken benevolently. And it just wasn't. And so these stories become important, but it's also so incredibly difficult to tell these stories because there is no context. Like, any non-Native person who doesn't know anything about Native might watch this film and be like, that's a white lady. Why is that old white lady upset about this thing? Like, there's no context to understanding why maybe she looks the way she does, why she feels the way that she feels, which is totally generational and person-to-person contact of, you know, non-Métis to Métis, which would also, you know, non-Native to Native, that tribes or individuals that live in areas where they're either the minority or it's a border town, there's so much contention in those places. The first racial slur I ever heard was when I was 6 years old, and I was called the Prairie N-word. And so that experience is very specific and very personal, and it feeds into why these stories, first of all, exist, and why these stories are important for Americans or for people in the West in general to be able to see, because we are lacking context of like true indigenous existence because we are beholden to the perception of our existence and not the reality of our existence.
Right, and there's that. You see, and the thing about it is that I fully understand the grandmother's position. I understand that. As the okay, my father is from the Philippines. Most of my peers in high school, if they were from their family was from China or from Japan or Portugal, they were at least one generation ahead of my father. Okay, my father is, he came over. The guys I went to school with, their grandfathers, the grandfathers came over. So there was a big difference in how you perceive these folks. My father had a very thick accent. You know, he's from the Philippines, so he flipped the P's and the F's. And it's the kind of stuff where you say, well, you know, you feel embarrassed by that. They don't speak proper English. No, notwithstanding, he also spoke, Ilocano and Tagalog and Visayan and Spanish. You know, it was somehow it was embarrassing that he had that thick accent. Nobody was beating me over the head about that. Nobody said, you know, you should be embarrassed by that. It was my peer group. They were the ones who were talking about that kind of stuff. So what I like about Janelle is that, and her brother said, okay, and the same way you did the thing, the work, all the paperwork to say, okay, this is who we are. You got to have that sense, and that's why I like filmmakers, I like artists, the creative types, because they have a way of telling a story that says, and here's who we are. Here's who we are. You know, it's not necessarily the kind of in-your-face, hard propaganda, hard power. It's a much softer, soft power. It's a projection of soft power that helps create that kind of identity. Can you speak? I don't know how much time we have, but could you say a little bit about how your work and the work of some of your colleagues in the creative community do that kind of work?
Yeah, I don't, I mean, some of it I suppose is on purpose, but I do think that the changing tide of understanding and representation in popular culture is almost entirely based in people in the creative field. Reservation dogs, filmmakers, writers, artists, contemporary artists, photographers. Matika Wilbur is a very well-to-do Indigenous photographer from the Northwest Pacific area, and she is a New York Times bestseller list on her photography right now. And so these narrative changes are happening because we're coming into these places, we're coming into these stories, and being given quarter to tell these stories where we haven't before. And I'll dovetail that a little bit to one of the questions that just came up about pretendians. It is really important to note too that as Native people are talking and as we are having this discussion, that it's really not so important who you claim, it's important who claims you. and the community that you belong to, the stake that you have in that space. And we're coming into a place that of accountability, I think, for people who claim to be Native and that aren't Native. And while that's happening, which I think you could easily say is good, bad, and indifferent, I think it's all of the things. There's also a lot of legitimately Native people that are bringing stories, modern stories that are rooted in modern era, but also with being Native, whether that's how that identity exists within your work or within the story that you're telling, whether that's a visual story or filmmaking or whatever. But it's also about tradition, and it's about language, and it's about struggle, and sometimes it's about trauma, and sometimes it's about the struggle of trying to maintain your own mental health through the process of these storytelling elements, and all of those things are creating change because they're coming from creators and from workers. And it's important that we, as we do that, make sure that the representation is right and true.
Thank you, Greg.
Oh, let me see. I'm reading new questions here. Someone commenting that that it's good that the in the film that the granddaughter knows she's Métis, not just through the blood and the DNA, but through her what he calls memory DNA. You know, she knows who she is. Her grandmother had the language and the memories of stories. The story in the film to this person is about reconnecting and remembering the connection to one's ancestors and their place and the intergenerational connectedness that goes in both directions. Right? That's a good point.
Great point.
Right? Yeah, and ensuring that the connections are not lost for future generations. Yeah. Well, that's and that's your experience as well, right? I mean, Greg. It came from you. You know, the push from you and your sister, the push for your mother to be enrolled, and
Yeah. No, I think there's an incredible power that exists. The story of like how my family were able to sort of reconnect appropriately is not a unique story. But there's also generations of people that are lost. My mom was very lucky that we were able to work a lot of that stuff out. The Indian Child Welfare Act wasn't put into place until also 1978, which would ensure that Native children had connections to their communities. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because those policies, those things that were created to eliminate those ties, to eliminate culture, to eliminate people's connections. And even with those official policies, these literal policies of genocide that exist both in the United States and in Canada, that they haven't been able to be successful with those policies. And I think that's a statement to how powerful that connection is.
You know, this is an issue that is not a Native issue only. One of the things that we work on here is a kind of erasure of identity. How it is such, I call it the long war for the, for the hearts, the soul, the minds of all people who arrive here in these United States. And that is, when you look at folks who came from Europe, right? We call them Italians. But when they came over, there was really no Italy. So Italy is a fairly modern construct. And so they came as people from a particular area, as Bill said, and as you said, is from a particular community. And they came over and generally, initially, moved in with their community members, their paesani, who were also there from the old country. And it's only through this process of ascription, this constant kind of clashing, the rubbing that kind of burnishes these identities and creates something called Italian, and then even more so go from Italian to white, so that the kinds of things that we call Italian food, the kinds of things that we call, any kind of ethnic food, has gone through a process just as, if you will, dramatic as has taken place with the people themselves. They become Americanized. So it's like Jean tells a story of someone, one of her friends from Mexico, eating a taco. Was it a taco?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Up in went to visit some people up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they said, well, we should show them, we should take him out for a nice Mexican meal. And they took him to a fast food taco place, and the this Mexican friend said, "Oh, this is really good. What do you call this?" It was so Americanized, you didn't recognize it as a taco. So we got about a minute here. This is just a shout out from someone who joined late, Samia, logging in from Bundjalung Nation in so-called Australia, and not only from that far away, but from a hospital bed. So glad you could join us, Samia.
Yeah.
I guess being in a hospital makes the time difference less onerous because you're up all night. All right, let me see. Aha. Okay.
Okay, is that it?
I think that's
Okay.
I think that's it. Should we turn it back to Megan? Greg, do you have any closing comment you want to make? Thank you so much.
I think I'm good. Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's always good talking to you guys.
Yeah, I know you're always look forward to the softball questions that Murph throws in. So thank you for joining us, and thanks to our audience for joining us.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us tonight.
I want to make a quick comment, okay?
Please.
I like difference. I like multiculturalism. It makes for a much more interesting world than to have a kind of a template that says, here's what you have to be, what you can't be, how you're supposed to dress, etc. And this is why I like this relationship we've had with DMNS and the American Indian what's it, Committee?
Commission.
Commission,
Denver
yeah,
American Indian
yeah.
Commission.
Because we're able to examine differences and to celebrate difference, as opposed to what seems to be the kind of the pervasive or the pervading mentality these days to say, you know, we don't want to hear about difference. So I appreciate the museum for that kind of support.
Well, we love having you guys. We've had a wonderful time partnering with you and a wonderful time tonight. This was a great discussion. So I want to thank you all for joining us. And if you enjoyed tonight's program and would like to support the Indigenous Film Series, we're going to put a link for the virtual donation bucket in the chat there. And we appreciate you helping make these films accessible to everyone. So thank you so much for joining us tonight and have a great night, everybody.